All right, everyone, let's get the show started. Welcome to our DevOps office hours. This is, you could say, the Stockholm edition. I am doing this from Sweden, visiting my parents who are have retired here. So forgive any technical glitches as a result of this. It's July 27th, 2022. My name is Eric Osterman. I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We are a DevOps accelerator, which means we help companies own their infrastructure in record time by building it together with your team while showing them the ropes. So if that sounds interesting, head over to cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. For those of you new to the call, the format's very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered. So feel free to unmute yourself at any time if you want to jump in and participate. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/officehours. We host these calls every week. Our call today is recorded, and that is my son in the background running around. We'll automatically post a recording of our session today to our YouTube channel. So if you enjoy the content and want to support the channel, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. Just go to youtube.com/cloudposse. Again, that's youtube.com/cloudposse. So with that said, let's see what we got on the docket for today. Got a few announcements that were shared with me through different channels. One is a little bit confusing. AWS SSO or Amazon single sign-on service, formerly known as AWS SSO, is now called AWS IAM Identity Center. I guess the impact of this is minimal at this stage. This is just going to happen automatically. You don't need to do any migration. What is unclear to me with this is like, what is the impact going to be on like Terraform resource names, if any, and where is it going from here? I don't know if Matt Calhoun, are you on the call?
I am. Yep.
Are you able to unpack this announcement anymore, or read into it? Like why now? What are they setting this up for? Any rename is pretty confusing in general. And Amazon hasn't always had a stellar reputation of naming their products.
Yeah, so if you pair this with the announcement we had on last week's call, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, where they now support customer managed policy attachments.
Oh yeah.
To AWS SSO, and then they renamed it. I think where they're going is this is going to be the de facto way to access your AWS accounts, and they'll phase out, and not recommend the traditional IAM service, like with IAM users and groups and roles and all those things that you create like outside of SSO. I think they're trying to centralize and ease access in a central point across your entire organization, so you can basically manage it in one spot and not all these disparate accounts and not having parity across all of them, etc. I think that's how they're going to focus it, but that's just speculation on my part. Not
I haven't missed any announcement. Like AWS SSO still only supports a single identity provider, right?
Currently, I just I asked the product manager. I sent a note to them about that, and I haven't heard back yet. So that was exactly my question, was that if you're really trying to push this as the de facto way to access AWS, then you need to do what IAM can do, is have multiple IDPs that we federate into AWS SSO, or sorry, AWS IAM Identity, whatever it's called now.
Well, what is the AWS IC? IAM IC?
But it's IAM IC, right? So it's like
IMIC.
So anyway, yeah, it's an acronym within an acronym. But that would be my guess, that's where they're going with it. But in some sort of an iterative way. Although they might just quickly announce like a bunch of things and then say this is the new way to do things. And I think if you look at Control Tower, the fact that they're pushing Control Tower and setting up your accounts that way, it automatically provisions SSO and deploys a bunch of things for SSO. I mean, the writing's kind of on the wall for me that that's the path they're going down.
Yeah. Makes sense. Any, this is a perfect follow-up to last week's call as well, where we talked about the pros and cons of AWS SSO and the like AWS SAML based approach, and why we've been kind of leaning towards the SAML based approach for a lot of things. Anyone else have some other commentary on this, Chad?
Yeah, I actually missed this, but I do use the SSO and control tower on my own environment, and I can see where this is pushing it towards that, but I still would see, I don't quite see where we could get, where AWS would push completely away from the IAM access as it is today. Just for more like application and service based, you're not going to be using that through your SSO, but maybe for your user access. So I think we'll probably still, I would see it very hard for them to get away from the rules and policies, maybe the IAM user.
Oh, I don't think roles and policies are going away at all. I think it's mostly the idea of like how you use IAM users today, and just making that less and less.
Yeah.
All right. Let's jump into the next announcement. It's a minor one, but it is exciting. It's something that has bit us a few times, as we are programmatically creating AWS accounts. We have from time to time screwed up that email convention, for example, substituting plus addresses for hyphenated addresses inadvertently, and then we have to go update that. So there's now programmatically ways of updating the primary contact information on your individual accounts. I don't know if that support rolled out in parallel with AWS providers or anything like that. Anyone look into this anymore?
I didn't.
Yeah, that would be very convenient. And this is like that, the one email address that you get for the account, right? That is what this is referring to, right?
Yeah, the primary contact information on the account. Yep.
So that's cool.
Or the root account, basically.
Yeah.
Each account, actually.
Yeah. So each account has an email address associated with it. The Cloud Posse best practice is usually to do a password reset on every one of those, so you can establish the MFA for each one of those member accounts. So you have a way of a break glass method of accessing that account. If, you know, for example, the organization access role for some reason is corrupted or destroyed.
Now, if we could just programmatically enroll an MFA, we could really be cooking.
No, right? That would be pretty rad. That would be pretty
that
rad.
would be so bad. So that would be totally cool.
And maybe support multiple MFA methods there. For example, multiple hardware authenticators.
What? You can support multiple MFAs when you're going through the single sign-on. Because I actually have 4 different ones configured under my SSO.
That's different though.
That's your IDP though. That's doing that, not Amazon.
Yeah, it's not the root account. Yeah. Well, no, I'm using AWS SSO, and you can have multiple MFA devices configured on your user through SSO.
Yeah.
You just can't have multiple MFAs on your root account or on an IAM user. It only allows for one device.
And our concern is from a BCP perspective, business continuity perspective. You want to have multiple MFAs or a shared MFA. So when or if that one person who's holding the keys to the kingdom is on vacation and you need to use it, you can.
Yep.
All right. The next minor announcement was just a running theme here in the Terraform community is the weekend project of creating your Terraform registry. There's yet another Terraform registry provider called Terralist in this case. Yeah, haven't checked it out or anything. Just it adds to the list of like 5 or 6 other Terraform registries available out there.
Hey, Eric. Sorry, Alan here. Just a quick question on the MFA topic. Have you considered using something like Authy, which allows you to have multiple physical devices having a shared MFA list? So on Authy, I can have Authy on multiple phones and devices, and have a single token then basically replicated across multiple devices.
Yeah, so that's with TOT-P. We do, so therefore, because you cannot use the hardware solution, we recommend using a shared TOT-P, so time-based token.
Yeah.
And for that, our go-to recommendation is just 1Password, which supports shared MFA for access. So putting the root credentials in a secured vault within 1Password and then setting up the TOT-P. So Authy is actually one of our alternative recommendations. Like for some people, putting the password and the MFA in 1Password rubs them the wrong way. And then, yeah, you could go the Authy route.
Yeah.
I've seen a couple other options.
Another way that.
Go on.
Yeah, another way, if you want to have it be able to be programmatically be usable for like a service account that you want to put MFA on it, you could also use like Vault and have Vault be able to return the token when you need it, so you can make the call, get your token, pass it on.
Yeah, we've used that for and a group that has access to that one, and that way you don't have to have one person that has access.
That's cool. I support
'Cause
that.
then
You can also do that with 1Password. There's a CLI for 1Password, so that you can do that as well.
Programmatic access, yeah. So you could technically get the benefits of the feature-rich UI and sharing permissions with the benefits of the command line using the 1P CLI, the 1Password CLI.
That's actually what I do with all my
and with Vault,
my own private stuff.
Go on
and
with
then
Vault.
with Vault, you could then set up your you could set your policy up, and if everybody's authenticating using an IDP to Vault, you could restrict, and whoever has the policy allowing access could get that token.
Yeah, so it's basically
still
like
restrict
whichever
it.
infrastructure you have in place. I guess my issue with the Vault solution is a little bit of a catch-22. You're using it to get these MFA credentials potentially for your root account or other member accounts. And Vault needs to be deployed somewhere unless you're using the HashiCorp cloud platform. So then where is it deployed, right? It needs to be a separate organization, separate place that resides, and that's the catch-22. So 1Password.
You deploy it to GCP.
Yeah.
And hope GCP and Amazon don't share an outage.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So-
and just I was gonna say, just the only reason I wasn't say like discounting Vault, but there's a lot of overhead clearly that goes with getting Vault up and running and managing it and running it and cost and all of that kind of thing. 1Password you can have for a couple $100 a year by going to their interface and logging in and saying sign up. It's a much lighter weight version to do it. And we can argue the pros and cons. I'm just sort of saying they're kind of both ends of the spectrum from a level of effort to get up and running perspective. So that was the only reason I was harping on 1Password over Vault. Not that Vault was anything wrong with it. In an enterprise, it's a great solution.
Yeah.
That's assuming you already have it and you just did a little more effort, I guess.
Yeah. If you already have it, for sure, it makes sense. But to set it up particularly just for this purpose would be like way overkill.
Oh yeah, it would definitely be overkill. But if you've already had it in place in your infrastructure and you're already having to add the MFA after the fact of the initial installation, it is the chicken and egg issue. But if you've got it, you can use it. If it's not already there, then maybe it's not the best solution.
So you wouldn't have MFA to get into your Vault then?
Well,
Personally,
then
yes.
you have MFA to get into your Vault with your single sign-on provider, right? MFA with Okta, for example, which gives you permission to access HashiCorp Vault, which gives you the MFA
Gotcha.
for AWS.
And the nice thing is it's the MFA authentication to Vault is no longer an enterprise only function either.
Hmm.
It's in the open source version of Vault. So
Oh, that's cool.
Nice.
That's cool. All right. Any more questions on that before we move on to the last announcement? All right. Last announcement was a nice Medium post. This is, you could say, 2 years later. I think a little bit over a year and a half later, maybe. Back in, gosh, I think it was December 2020. We did a presentation where we brought in HashiCorp Cloud, Scalar, N0, Spacelift, and had a 10-minute showdown per vendor, kind of highlighting their strengths and weaknesses. Obviously, all those platforms have evolved a lot in that time. This guy, Elliot, okay, I haven't done a background check. I don't know who he's affiliated with, if he's one of these companies, but has done a breakdown of the current state of the various Terraform Cloud alternatives, including a new one, Cloudify, which we hadn't talked about before.
I've worked with Cloudify before in a previous environment.
Interesting. So yeah, I'd like to learn a little bit more about Cloudify as well. And let's see, anything else just to highlight? Yeah. So if you are in that stage where you're evaluating the various platforms for Terraform automation and collaboration software, what we're calling tacos, then check out this post. Jeremy, tell me more about Cloudify. What stood out to it? Would you use it again?
They were using it and spinning off not Terraform, but they were actually calling out to Puppet.
Okay.
I think I didn't really have any. Interesting. There they are. It was while I was working for FICO.
Okay. Oh,
which was just
FICO was one of their.
Yeah, FICO's on their main page there as a testimonial. Yeah. So yeah, it was while I was working for FICO, and it wasn't used in all the teams, I don't think, but some of their stuff was working with it. It wasn't bad, but I think I don't know if it was necessarily the tool or if it was the deployments that were built with it, but it had a lot of issues where it wasn't really idempotent, where Terraform would have just executed. We had stuff where it was like, if it failed, we had to kill it and restart. And so I think it was more in the way that the stuff was written, not necessarily the tool. But it was the only time I had worked with it. So it was a brand new tool for me to have to work with.
I think, yeah, Cloudify in general is more of a, I'd say more broad than what a lot of the other tools are trying to accomplish. Like it's literally trying to take over pipelines for any DevOps tool that exists out there. And it's sort of a conflation between like what we would use Spacelift for and what we would use, oh my God, I'm blanking out the,
GitHub Actions or
no, the stupid Kubernetes deployment thing that you write everything to GitHub state and then it
Argo? Flux.
Argo. Thank you. I don't know why in my head Argo was just not popping into my head. Well, we also would use Argo for. It's like a conflation of the two, basically, and other things like, and it wants to be your full CICD pipeline and all that kind of stuff. So it's basically like trying to be everything in one box.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, I would say, yeah, I would agree with that assessment. And it's like, yeah, if you had multiple systems that needed to work in conjunction and orchestrate that would be where Cloudify would come into play. Like being able to trigger bringing up your infrastructure with Terraform, but then spinning off Ansible to do the actual configuration, whatever, where you have multiple stages and you need to have it orchestrated properly. That would be where I would see that volume.
Yeah. But just a heads up, Jeremy, I think there's something up with the audio driver, maybe with you. It's like chopping in and out. Sounds like my battery's low or
Okay.
something. All right. Let's move into some questions. There's a good one from Vinkata. Anyone have a preferred Helm chart they would recommend for deploying Prometheus Grafana? This is a good question. You know why? Because when we started working with Prometheus Grafana, it was back when Michael, I want to say Fairchild, I think it was somebody else, some Michael there. He was at Ticketmaster and he wrote the first Helm chart out there. That moved over to CoreOS. CoreOS donated to Helm Charts Official. Helm Charts Official was shut down. And then there was the Helm Prometheus community that started maintaining a chart. It wasn't ready for prime time. So we just went over to Bitnami and started using theirs. And that was 2 years ago. And we've since stopped recommending Prometheus and Grafana because we are tired of having to support all these different charts, the flavor of chart of the year. So it almost started to feel like that the only practical way you could maintain Prometheus was to maintain your own chart. So you didn't have to constantly switch between these Helm chart providers, especially if you're using Prometheus and you're using Prometheus without a storage backend like Thanos. I mean, it's a stateful service. So anytime these charts change underneath you, it is a very painful migration path. So with that said, can anyone help answer Venkata's question of what do you use these days?
Yeah, there's a Prometheus community actually has like an official Helm chart that they maintain and update like pretty well. Like that actually doesn't seem too bad. But the only other question I was just going to say is maybe ask yourself, do you really have to deploy Prometheus and Grafana, or can you use a managed service because it's a pain in the ass to run? So that would be my first question.
Grafana has their managed cloud now. Prometheus obviously is offered as a service from Amazon. It's obviously a lot more expensive than self-hosting, but self-hosting and using open source, contrary to developer opinion, it's not free for the business. There's a lot of cost and overhead transferring that knowledge, and teams I think that succeed running Prometheus and Grafana often have at least a couple people whose sole job is managing the monitoring infrastructure.
Just my own input. Recently also looked at the AWS Grafana offering, and it just seems that in order to activate some of the more common plugins that you may want, it does mean that you need to look at the enterprise offering if you do look at the managed service there. So again, just be aware of that. It is a nice service though. It's very easy. It tied the reason I liked it is it tied straight into AWS SSO, so you don't need to worry about setting up your auth independently again. So from that perspective, I definitely did enjoy the managed service from AWS for both Prometheus and Grafana.
That's cool. Good feedback. Anyone else have something to add?
We use Prometheus. Has anybody else used it?
Yeah, the operator.
Yeah.
Yeah. And are using what is your storage backend?
Yeah, initially we just had that was the funny thing. Somebody else had set this up, and then they were just using like temporary storage for getting that. And so I'm one of the things I'm doing is moving it so we have like a federated version when we're using Thanos to store in S3 stuff.
Yeah. Which is a pretty large escalation in scope for doing it. And that's one other thing. Yeah, when you are using Prometheus, your data sets start getting very large. If you're not using something like Thanos, you basically need a node with 30, 40 gigs, 60 gigs of RAM so you can process some of those queries. Thanos alleviates a lot of that by doing some compaction and post-processing.
I would just quickly like to add that there is also, I don't know if you mentioned it before, but there is opstrace.com, right? You know this one, I guess.
Opstrace.
Opstrace, wait, just put it here. Anyways, what they offer is basically turnkey Prometheus setup on its own cluster. It's not Terraform based for what it's worth, but you should be able to include this in your project or whatever your context is. Okay.
There we have that.
No startup life and stuff, right? Anyways.
Acquired by GitLab.
Okay, well, last time I tried it, that was not the case. Okay, anyways, yeah.
Okay, so it is still being developed.
Sign of confidence, even. Anyways, it's from the Docker guy. You know, there were 2 Docker persons, and I think it's one of them. Anyways, just wanted to share.
Interesting.
We did not end up going with them. We switched to Datadog, but I was running this and it looked nice. I tested it. It seems like a good default setting. Maybe something to consider.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing. That was not on my radar, so good to know. All right. And the next question, Matt Gowie, you're asking about cloud. Oops. Yeah. Matt Gowie is asking, a frequent reoccurring topic in office hours is, what are people using for Beyond Corp tooling? And the latest question here was, has anyone used Cloudflare's tunnel and access product? A prospect of his has just asked about it and wants to hear if anyone adopted and what their experience was. So Cloudflare, I think it was originally called Argo, Argo tunnels, and then there was some confusion what Argo meant, and I think they've rebranded it since and just call it tunnels. And I think it was a little bit of a, and it was released prematurely, I think, as far as Cloudflare products goes. And if you're a Kubernetes user and you wanted to use it, it was really cool. At first, they came out with a Argo ingress controller, and then that project got renamed, and then it got sunset, and then there was ultimately no controller for Kubernetes, and you could roll your own. But then I started wondering, well, if we're rolling our own, are we doing something wrong here, or that Cloudflare isn't providing something? So as much as I've wanted to use it in our engagements and have brought it up as one of the options, especially when we stopped promoting Keycloak and Gatekeeper, we were looking, still have been kind of looking for the drop-in replacement for that. One of our alternatives was this Argo tunnels. So every time I've proposed it, it's never been selected, but I like it in principle.
Can I? Maybe I'm conflating two things, but isn't the Cloudflare tunnel their DDoS protection thing for web servers?
No,
I'm pretty sure that's what it is.
It exposes your internal services. So what's really nice is your clusters never need to be public. They can reside entirely in private subnets. You deploy this agent inside your cluster, and then it can, for example, you can deploy your standard Kubernetes ingress controller entirely in private subnets. You can deploy the Argo tunnel now sitting in front of that one, and then the Argo tunnels out to to Cloudflare's network. I forget what they call it, like their railgun.
Yeah, it's basically so that you can your servers can never have like direct like DDoS or other attacks like on them because they're protected by the Cloudflare Edge network, right? It's not really for remote access.
Well, you haven't, but that's the thing. It ties directly
all
in
conflicted
access product, so it's that vertically integrated.
Yeah.
Got it. But
Okay,
that
so it's
tunnel. But tunnel itself is basically the thing that connects your private things to that, and then you need another product if you want access. Like access is a separate product, I believe.
It is, but it's actually I think it's something like free for 5 or 10 seats, I think, and then it's only $2 a seat thereafter.
So the access component is basically piggybacking off Warp. We're actually doing a POC on Cloudflare tunnels, but for a different requirement. Ours is more from a corporate security and endpoint DNS control requirement that we're trying to solve for using either something like the equivalent of Cisco's OpenDNS or something else. So I haven't really looked at the other side of it, but that is an interesting take on using something like Warp then in your own environment to then use that as your access into your privatized Cloudflare tunneled environments. And according to Cloudflare, it's completely possible to have that set up. We just haven't gotten there yet.
I think part of what is inhibiting us from sticking our neck out there and just recommending it is it hasn't really been clear to me what sort of scale this supports out of the box, how you would scale it. And, you know, maybe it's, which makes it perfectly suitable for your internal applications. But if this is your, you know, your moneymaker app serving, 10 million daily active users, would you use this? I don't know. Probably not.
My question is this more for the actual application usage or the management? Because it sounded, the way I was hearing it, it sounded a lot like it might be something along the lines of the zero trust HashiCorp boundary access, where you can proxy through to get to your systems.
So that's the question that Matt Gowie is specifically asking. But it just to be clear that this solution is built on top of other solutions. You don't have to use the zero trust stuff in order to use like the tunnel, the Argo tunnels. But you could add, and then Cloud HashiCorp's boundary would be an alternative offering that's come up also as well on office hours.
I think what's interesting is that Cloudflare's offerings in this regard kind of can serve those multiple purposes. Like you could do it for, your full enterprise access to internal applications. And you could also do it for multiple other use cases, because their zero trust platform is just kind of, the product suite is deep, like you're talking about. It's like layers of products. Which is interesting.
If you're looking at it from the zero trust perspective, would something like a strong DM or a Go Teleport potentially be alternatives that you would consider?
Yeah, we've discussed those heavily here a bunch. I was just interested if anybody was using this with, a lot of success, and if they had any high level thoughts on it. That prospect, died this week. Not like they died, but like they're no longer a prospect in my pipeline.
They're dead. They're dead.
I care less.
They're dead to you.
But I still think it's interesting because it just seems like
stick a fork in it.
I'm sorry to hear that, Matt. But yeah, this is a good question nonetheless. I think if anything I take away from this is that, man, like I hear teleport all the time come up. We have many customers using teleport. It was brought up on the show again today using teleport. Strong DM, same thing. Zscaler, same thing. Cloudflare, in our circle at least, it's always crickets. Like, oh, we're doing a POC, or we've done POCs too, and it's in a lab, but I never hear anybody, we love it, we're using it in production, etc. I'm sure those companies exist, just they never on office hours. So can you guys ask your friends to join? So next question, Eric Berg asks, let me open it up here. I'm working on pulling out my Kubernetes workload deployments to a non-Terraform based solution. Understandable. What solutions are you using, us, the community, using? I've come up with paths using Flux, GitHub Actions, Spacelift. I didn't hear Argo CD. I didn't hear Scaffold. There is a list, probably 2 pages long, of Kubernetes deployment tools available to you there. I would break them into 2 classes of deployment tools. You have the deployment tools that you run from your CI and your CD systems that actually require full Kubernetes access basically to do anything. At best, you can limit that process maybe to a namespace or something. Then you have the other class of deployment tools that use this pattern. I think Flux calls the change firewall. And the idea is that you have your cluster reading from a trusted source, like a GitHub repository, and then you have your software be able to commit to that repository, and that repository now is your change firewall. So in order to affect anything on either side, you got to be able to modify or manipulate the Git history. So that's what Argo CD does. That is what We've Worked Flux does. They have slightly different approaches. I think there's, you could argue that the Spacelift integration, their new support for Kubernetes, I believe, kind of goes along those lines. And the reason to go with one or the other is I really don't like from the conventional naive, let's call it the naive approach to deployments to Kubernetes. This is where you do it from GitHub Actions, Circle CI, etc. What I don't like about it is whatever that process is, it has basically unfettered access to a namespace or the Kubernetes cluster. Usually it's the Kubernetes cluster. And I feel a lot better when you have the other approach where you're just manipulating the state of a repo. It's really obvious how you revert because you just revert a commit in that repository. There's a running history of every change that's gone out. It is denormalized. So, or it's denormalized. So it is the raw manifests that got deployed versus if you're using some of these other approaches, it's not really clear what the last known state of the Kubernetes cluster was, unless you somehow reconstitute that by looking at deployments in your CI platform or your CD platform. So before we continue, any other paradigms I'm missing here?
Well, there's one subtle distinction between, say, Spacelift and Flux, which is basically the pull-push thing. You know, Flux is the operator sitting in your cluster, polling the repo and acting those changes, and Spacelift is reacting to a webhook from.
Okay, So then you could say that it's a variation of that. Instead of having the operator in the cluster, you have the operator outside of the cluster. In this case, it's a managed service you have to pay for called Spacelift that is responding to webhook events in a repo and then synchronizing those with the cluster. So in that sense, it is pushing to the cluster. So with the change firewall, you could do it, implement it in two ways, push or pull.
Again, maybe something that's been covered a lot, but thoughts on a tool like Spinnaker that was heavily prioritized maybe a couple of years ago. How's that in comparison to something like Argo in today's world?
You can't, it's almost an apple to oranges comparison. Argo is strictly Kubernetes deployments, end of story. You can technically, I guess, do deployments of Terraform, do deployments of things to an S3 bucket, but that needs to be implemented as a custom resource in what you're deploying to Kubernetes. So then you're basically using Argo to coordinate and synchronize with Kubernetes, which is then reconciling and coordinating with everything else and deploying that out. And that feels kind of abstract to me. While Spinnaker was designed to, you can deploy it to Kubernetes, you can orchestrate complex workflows that are tied to Kubernetes. So with that said, what we're currently gravitating towards these days is using still Argo CD. Very, very curious also about Weave. The requirement for Argo has just been customer driven. Most of the customers have indicated an upfront interest in using Argo versus Flux. Flux there was some, for a while, I know some people didn't like the idea that Flux committed the state back to the version control, like when the cluster changed, but that's a configurable option, so you don't have to have that. I believe Flux adds a lot of other bells and whistles, and including the ability to have a managed offering, but also to do things like Terraform deployments and other specialized forms of deployments. So that's all I have to add.
Well, yeah, just, to reframe our environment.
Yeah.
We're basically deploying to, 5 to 10 environments, the same code, everything, just with different configs. And what we boiled down our process to is basically there's what amounts to a properties file in a directory of, client environment. And we're kind of shooting for keeping with that. So they just go in and say, oh yeah, app A, bump the version, PR, commit that, and that triggers or is pulled, and that goes. So, it's about also setting this up for multiple environments and stuff.
Argo CD sounds perfect for what you're trying to do then.
Yeah.
It really does. And the one trade-off, just to highlight it, what deploys Argo CD, by the way? Chicken and the egg. That might be Terraform. If you want to look at using Terraform, look at our component for that. We have a component for it.
I look at your component for everything, Eric.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. And then the next thing is I have an internal conundrum still. I like Argo CD and I also like Terraform, and I don't want to do my Terraform in Argo CD, and I don't want we will Terraform Argo CD itself. What we lack when you move to this paradigm, it works really well for everything that is Kubernetes native, but inevitably to do things effectively and securely in Kubernetes, you're going to need RBAC or IIRC roles, IAM service account roles, and those have to be provisioned with whatever you're using IAC for. There are some options now for Kubernetes, and you could define those there in some way, but the argument remains is that sometimes this stuff gets more complicated. So now what you've done is you've bifurcated your state for deploying an application between that which is managed with infrastructure as code and Terraform, and that which is managed with infrastructure as code for Kubernetes in Argo CD, and coordinating that release. Now that gets complicated, and now you're back to, we're going to deploy Spinnaker, and we're going to have Spinnaker, deploy this to Argo CD, and then we're going to have Spinnaker tell Spacelift to deploy it. And have we done this? No, never. That's going to be a process you're probably going to just end up coordinating through WikiOps and convention and process.
Good. I'll take a good look at Argo. Thanks.
All right.
One thing also, the one thing that might be a solution on that is there is a hosted Argo. CodeFresh just rolled out. You can do either like a standard SaaS model or a hybrid model too. Interesting.
So CodeFresh is in addition to their, so CodeFresh, by the way, has, I'm not sure if it's fair to say a pivot, but they did a major redesign or re-architecture on their platform, and they had originally implemented a lot of complementary functionality to what Argo did. Then they became a very large backer of the Argo open source project, and now they've built and branded their product largely around Argo CD. And one of the nice things is they can kind of federate your Argo clusters under a single UI and make management of Argo, like in an enterprise context, more feasible. So it's interesting that you say that they also now offer maybe just a hosted Argo solution without using maybe some of the CodeFresh functionality.
It's like so there's like the classic platform, and then there's like the new I think they're just calling it like GitOps, or there's another name, marketing name for it, but yeah, it's basically just the hosted version of Argo with that. You just install their runtime in the hybrid model, and it just installs everything.
Okay, well, that's cool. Good to know that.
Yeah, we're evaluating it right now for our workloads.
Okay, cool. Very cool. All right, let's see. Next announcement or next question was This was by David Gregory. Let me bring up the Slack conversation here. Why am I not getting the link here? All right, I'll just read it from here. Control tower, this is a question regarding control tower and whether it could be fully terraformed. If I recall correctly, Cloud Posse doesn't use control tower because you can't terraform it. What do you do instead? Dave is just about to embark on building a fresh organization to migrate old accounts into, and was planning to use account factories for Terraform, so that's AFT actually, to vend new accounts. But the lack of terraformability put me off, and now I can't really see what I'm getting myself into using Control Tower. Yeah, massively conflicted on this. Obviously, to what Matt Calhoun was alluding to earlier in our call today, is that Amazon's putting a lot of engineering resources behind Control Tower and their IAM, I forget what was identity control panel solution, AWS SSO, etc. And yet Terraform is obviously not a first-class consideration in what they do there, being a product outside of Amazon. So what Cloud Posse has is, if you go to Terraform AWS components, and if you buy into our whole methodology and what we do, we have our account module, our account component here. This is a Terraform root module. We call our opinionated root modules components. This component here has the ability to Terraform your entire organization, your organizational units, your member accounts, tag them, and do it all natively with Terraform. This is what we use in all of our engagements. Account factories for Terraform, when it was announced, we were super excited. We were like, oh my God, you can finally Terraform Control Tower. Nope, that's not at all what it was about. Account factories for Terraform is all about baselining your accounts. Account factories for Terraform will, first of all, there's a bunch of ClickOps, ironically, you need to do to set up account factories for Terraform. And then once you have it set up, it will help you Terraform some baseline configurations inside of an AWS account. For example, getting your Terraform state backend set up, getting your VPCs set up for that account, and so forth. But that whole apparatus is convoluted, works with code build and code pipeline. There's no approval process as part of that. Some of the good things it does is you can reconcile, or you can apply these changes across your organization by making changes to your templates. The downside is there's no way to review those changes before applying them across your organization. So you need to make sure you only hire your 10x engineers who don't make mistakes to make changes to that Terraform code, or you might just really hose your entire org if you make mistakes.
You actually need a test org, basically, is the way that you really do this. Yeah.
You need a test organization to do this. So this is just the state of it today. I don't mean to, I'm really, I think it is cool that that Amazon is, head on addressing companies' desire to use Terraform and giving organizations a way to do that. I think this solution evolved from Amazon working with so many enterprises, and in so many enterprises, teams are just only ever given, here are your 3 accounts that you get to work, and that is your walled garden. Here's your other 3 accounts. And it's never this holistic approach at how the whole thing is terraformed, because they're not doing it. And the majority of accounts and organizations are still managed through ClickOps in these organizations by some IT, process.
Yeah, so can I just add one quick thing? I think it's so you're focused on Terraform, and I understand why, because that's how we do things. But Amazon has chosen not to allow you to automate the creation of Control Tower in any way. You can't do it in CloudFormation. You can't do it through a CLI. You can't do it through one of their SDKs. Any of those things. It's not a Terraform exclusion. I think it's a conscious decision that they believe that the initial bootstrapping of an organization is a one-time thing and it's not worth automating. at least in their mind, like that isn't the problem they're focused on solving with this. They're focused on, once I have my organization up and running, how do I quickly spin up new accounts that meet my company's baseline for security and monitoring and compliance and ... after that. And I think it's just solving a different problem than the one we'd like it to solve.
Yeah.
So yeah. So
That's well put.
Yeah.
So I don't, did we answer your question there, Dave?
Yeah, I guess I was trying to work out. I hadn't really got my head around your full organization terraforming bit before. I keep listening to podcasts and then taking a while to not find all the bits of your solution.
Yeah.
But being able to vend new things, I guess, being able to do that using a GitOps approach in AFT was quite appealing. But I guess, if we're GitOps based on your kind of structure, we could do the same thing.
Yeah, that's more or less the same thing. It's just that, and I guess the other nuance just to highlight with AFT is then when you want a new account, you can do that by committing to one of the GitHub or version control repos, and then 45 minutes later you'll have an account set up with that baseline. It's when you use Terraform, you're kind of like scratching your head. Wow, that took me usually like 5 minutes to do, and now this other process is very slow. But they're speeding that up. They acknowledge it. It's been single threaded to this point too. So if you need a lot of accounts created, it could be a slow process. But again, to Matt's point, it's not a problem most companies have. And yeah, if you are curious and you just like to see behind the scenes what that looks like, or if anyone else is curious. This is the value add. This is what Cloud Posse does. We make it easier to adopt all these tools, all these Terraform modules that we have into an end-to-end solution that you can use for your company. And we have a process and a plan that we follow to do that. We have the documentation for our customers to do that. Right now, we don't open source that documentation. We might in the future, but right now that is what we use internally. All right. Well, we are pretty much out of time for today. Let's see if there was any more questions in the channel here.
I had one I just added.
Oh, AWS SSO sync. Yeah, what is this about?
Yeah. So because G Suite doesn't support Skim, you can use this tool, which you run as a Lambda, and it'll basically map users in G Suite via attributes or whatever on their side to groups within AWS SSO or Identity Center or whatever now. And I was just wondering if anybody's run it and actually had success with it, because I want to solve that annoying problem. You've run it before, Matt?
Yeah. It's it works. It works. It does what it's expected to do. Like anything, it's not as like neat and clean as if Google just supported Skim and synced all those things behind the scenes and you didn't have to do anything. Admittedly, the time I did it was probably a year and a half ago. So I've actually looked at a bunch of their updates recently, and it looks like they're nearing a 1.0 release.
Release date at 10 there.
Yeah, so hopefully, like some of there were a few idiosyncrasies, particularly on the deprovisioning of users side, like that I ran into, but it looks like in recent releases they've updated a whole bunch of those things. So
cool.
So
yeah, you can run it almost anywhere basically. So I wasn't running it as a Lambda, just to be fair. I was running it as a cron job, like on a Linux box that was just syncing between, like on a small EC2 instance basically at the time, because I didn't want to take the time to figure out how to run it as a Lambda. But I think there's an easier way to do that now too.
Yeah. Okay, cool. good to know that you used it, even if it was a year and a half ago. The fact that
Yeah.
it did its job might be something I proposition to a client or two. But yeah.
Now we have our Lambda module. I think we more, if it came up, I'd be more inclined to have a standard solution for this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we could certainly dog food this ourselves, because right now we're manually doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. All right, everyone, we are basically out of time for today. I wanted to thank everyone for participating. Lots of great conversation again. So thank you all for participating. If you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube channel, go to youtube.com/CloudPosse to subscribe. Again, that's youtube.com/CloudPosse. If you haven't added me on LinkedIn, please do add me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Osterman. I love to connect with everyone and what you're up to. Register for our weekly office hours by going to cloudposse.com/office-hours. Then you get a invitation link to join these sessions live. And if you are interested in working with Cloud Posse, do reach out. Go to cloudposse.com/quiz to book a session with me directly. We'll go through your situation. I'll show you behind the scenes how everything works here at Cloud Posse, and we'll figure out if we're a fit for what you need. Go to cloudposse.com/quiz. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week, and see y'all next week.
See you.
See ya.